Hi and welcome to our third bite-sized video which will show you how to enter service and contribution information for a full-time member. In this example, our member is working full-time, they have no days excluded and their earnings are pensionable, meaning they're not opted out. We'll use the information from our sample payslip and enter it into the MCR template. The first field you'll need to complete is the Record Action field. This will need to be completed for all members. If you're adding service you've never submitted before, then you'll need to input the letter A for Add. The next field you'll need to complete is the Teacher's Pensions Reference Number. This is the member's unique 7-digit reference number and must include all zeros where applicable. If the member's new to teaching and doesn't have a reference number, please input 7 zeros and a record will be set up and you'll receive notification via a member print. In our example, it's 12//34567. You'll need to enter this number without the /. Next, you'll need to provide the member's national insurance number. If you don't have this, then please contact us. You'll then need to enter the member's forename. In our example, it's John. And then the member's surname, which is Smith. You'll then need to enter either a M for male or F for female in the gender column. And then their date of birth. This needs to be without the / in the standard UK date format. In our example, it's 16/06/1992. The next 5 columns contain the address details, with lines 1 and 2 being mandatory. In our example, the member's address line 1 is 7 York Lane and address line 2 is York. There are 3 additional address line columns if needed, but otherwise they don't need to be completed. The final part to enter is the postcode. In our example, it's Y011ZZ. You'll need to make sure there's a space between the 2 parts of the postcode. However, if the member has an overseas address, you'll need to enter the letters OVSA instead. Please also provide the zip code on one of the lines above. Now you need to enter the member's email address, which ideally needs to be their personal email address. However, if it isn't available, you can use their work email. If you don't hold an email address for them, please leave this field blank. That's the personal information complete. Now we need to move on to providing service information. This starts by providing the local authority number for the employer the member works for. This is a 3-digit number that's assigned based on the local authority area that the member works in. In our example, it's 123. You'll then need to enter the establishment number they work for. In our example, it's 4567. Next, you'll need to provide the member's role identifier. This is new for MCR submissions, so we advise you to read the MCR user guide and our role identifier hot topic guide available on our website for further information. The role identifier are 2 values that are separated by a /. The first half needs to be in relation to the member's contract of employment. For example, it could be their payroll number or something as simple as the number 1. The second half needs to reflect the role they hold within their contract of employment. In our example, we're using C1 for Contract 1 and R1 for Role 1. Members' enrolment status is a field that should only be populated if they are being either auto or contractually enrolled into the scheme at the start date. In the following field, enter either auto or cont depending on the scenario. If they've not enrolled in that submission month, you can leave this field blank. This is a new field for MCR and uses the information you'd have previously provided on an enrolment template and combines it into this submission. This field is also where you'd input the start date of the period you are reporting on. In our example, the date is the beginning of the month as the member has worked the full month, so it would be 1st of May 2022 in the standard UK format, without the / as shown on screen. You then need to provide the end date in the same format as the start date. As our example has worked a full month, their end date is the last day of the month that the member has worked, which is 31st of May 2022. Finally, you may need to include the withdrawal confirmation, which is important if the member's left employment on the end date provided. If so, you'd populate this column with a W. Days excluded need to be included for a full-time member where they've had any unpaid days in the period. For a part-time member, you'd only populate this if the member has no pay in the whole period and must be recorded as all days excluded. The full-time, part-time regular and part-time irregular field is mandatory. FT would be used for a full-time member, PTR would be used for someone who has a regular part-time position, and PTIC for someone who has no set hours, i.e. a supply teacher. You'll then need to enter the annual full-time salary. From our example payslip, this is £38,400. For a part-time member, that would need to be their full-time equivalent salary. Part-time earnings will be left blank in our example, but if your member is part-time, their part-time earnings for the period will go in this column. Our member hasn't worked any overtime, but if they had, then we'd include this data in the overtime column next. The same would apply for additional pensionable payments. This is where you record any out-of-school learning activities or contractual bonus payments in the period. The status indicator column is provided for members who are either on family leave or sick leave where their pay is reduced. The calc method for contribution tier will be discussed in one of our further videos but doesn't need to be provided in this example. Calculation contribution date is for when earned members, which again will be covered in another video. What we do need to complete next is the actual pensionable pay in the pay period. This value is all the pensionable earnings excluding overtime that the member has earned in the period. If they've opted out of the scheme, this will still need to be populated but with zeros. In our example, it's £3,200. Our example member hasn't had any pensionable overtime pay in the pay period, so that field will remain blank. The same applies for the notional pensionable pay in the pay period for our example member too, as they're not on family or sick leave. If the member was receiving reduced pay, this field would be populated with the amount they would normally be receiving before any reduction. Now we come to the employer contributions column. This value needs to be calculated based on the actual pensionable pay, added to any pensionable overtime, and then multiplied by the current employer contribution rate, which is 23.68%. That value for our example is £757.76. The member contributions column needs to be calculated based on the actual pensionable pay in the pay period, multiplied by 12 to get the equivalent salary rate we need to use to determine their tier. If the member was on reduced pay due to sickness or family leave, this will be based on their notional pay. For our example, it would be 3,200 multiplied by 12, giving a total of 38,400 and a contribution tier rate of 8.6%. Or enter would be 3,200 plus any pensionable overtime multiplied by 8.6%, which is £275.20. Finally, we need to confirm the member contribution tier, which for our example member is 8.6%. That line is now complete for a when paid member. There are some additional fields that you may need to provide for flexibilities and elections, for example, if the member has additional pension contribution amounts. Any fields after the Preston contribution amount are for when earned calculations, which will be covered in another of our bite-sized videos. Once all of your lines have been completed, go back to the beginning of the template as you'll now need to validate your data. To do that, press the Check Data and continue to the Section B button, which will then check the data you've provided is OK. As no errors have been produced, we can now complete Section B to confirm the contribution details that we're going to provide based on the members' data we've provided.